I've been thinking about this episode a lot this week, and it's incredibly surreal to me that I have my childhood best friend on the East Coast joining us on the mic, and I have my first friend in San Francisco. I'm going to call you my first friend.
I don't think that puts me on the same level, but
No.
Go on.
It's not about levels. It's about like the collision of worlds, and that's
But
really
if there
strange.
were levels, they would not be the same.
If there were levels, they would not be the same.
Now, is Peter flexing on me right now?
A little bit.
Okay.
I'm Hunter Pence, and you're listening to the Misplay podcast. Oh, yeah.
Hello, and welcome to the Misplay, where we play cryptid with people a lot smarter than us. My name is Mark.
My name is Jason.
My name is Peter.
Peter is joining us from North Carolina to talk to us today about Star-Crossed Realms, about joining the Misplay, and about being Mark's best friend forever.
Yeah.
Who is Peter? Let's start there, Mark. Where are we?
Peter is my childhood best friend and lead designer on one of the games we're talking about for the Misplay.
That's right. But let's let Peter answer that question. Peter, who are you?
I guess I'm the lead designer on Star-Crossed Realms. Early on, when I was listening to an episode of the Misplay, I had an idea for a game that I wanted Mark to make me, and I sent him a barrage of texts about a dating game that I thought would be fun as a deck builder.
I think your desire for you're hoping I would build this game was kind of the hook that we used to get the Misplay clause in you so that we could sign you onto the partnership. Because behind the scenes, Jason and I have been talking a lot about things that we'd like to do or haven't been able to do because we just don't have the manpower. And so it was kind of a happy circumstance that we were able to bring you in and have you join a facet of the work and be the designer for early Star-Crossed Realms. But before we get into some of that, tell us a little bit about your gaming background, Peter.
Yeah, so most of my gaming background really is in tabletop RPGs, long time playing Dungeons & Dragons with Mark, and then games like Mage of the Ascension and some other tabletop games along the way. I played a lot of board games with my dad growing up. I played a lot of chess. My grandfather was a competitive chess player, and so I got sent to go play chess with him a lot. I did not really enjoy the experience. I played a lot of Axis and Allies with my dad as well, which, if you're not familiar, is an incredibly complicated World War II simulator. And I really did not like competitive games. It's funny, in the first or second episode, Jason says that his desire is to beat Mark. And my impulse with games is never to beat the other person. When I was a kid, I turned Axis and Allies into a collaborative game, so my dad and I would always be playing on the same team because I did not like playing versus games. And so that's kind of why I probably fell more naturally into tabletop games where we all kind of sit around a table and tell a mutual story together.
What got you to the other side of the table where you started thinking about, oh, I want to make a game?
Yeah, so eventually you're always going to get to this point when you're running tabletop games. Maybe not always, but I think a lot of times people who run tabletop games will eventually hit the point where they're like, the mechanics of this game do not support the kind of story I want to tell. A classic example of that is you always see people using Dungeons and Dragons as a chassis to tell mystery stories, to tell murder mysteries, or to tell romances, or games that is just really not well suited for. And eventually, as a storyteller, you're probably going to want to either start designing mechanics yourself. And so I did some like small mechanics designs for tabletop games, like when we were in high school and I was running games for and with Mark. Later on, more recently, just trying to tell very specific stories that the tabletop games as written just really did not support. So that's really was my headway into it. So that's kind of been my trajectory with designing games. It's really just, seeing the shortfall and what's out there. And there's always going to be that shortfall because there's always going to be a different kind of story that you want to tell that mechanics of a specific game are not going to support the way you imagine them. So it really just comes from that desire to always be keeping the mechanics of the game in lockstep with the story that you want to tell. So that's been my arc with game design.
How did we convince you to sign on to the Misplay plan or the internship, as it were?
It's never going to take a big lift for Mark to convince me to do something, just in general. I don't think it's ever been a big lift for that. When it became clear that it's like, man, this is something that we could be working on together.
And I think that piece, that collaborative piece, is why it was such a light turning on for me to be like, oh, Jason, we need to bring Peter in to do this, because a lot of what we've talked about this month has been, again, the need for a little bit more manpower and people resources, but also in our recent playtests, the collaborative experience of playing was so transformative for the way that we were thinking about the games that we were working on.
Yeah, and one of the things that Peter had just said is that they were excited about working with you. And what you don't know from your end, Peter, is as soon as Mark started talking about what, we're calling Star-Crossed Realms right now, versus we were talking about MMA Gauntlet and we were talking about Supermarket Game, Mark was just lit up. He was excited. It was very clear that he was excited to be talking to you about creating a game. And I had said to Mark, I don't care what game it is. Like, you are so passionate about this right now. Let's explore it. Let's follow that thread.
So yeah, it's not a surprise to to hear you say that. But to that, and I do think like having multiple games to be working on at the same time, for example, working on Star-Crossed Realms and MMA Gauntlet is been a really interesting process where Mark and I are talking about what we're getting out of different playtests, because a big part of this is about learning the iterative process of game design. It's like, okay, what do you get from one playtest and how do you get to another? It's like, what are you looking for in each playtest? Having that cross-pollination is pretty ideal to, regardless of whatever game it is or whatever game gets across the finish line. Either way, it's going to be sum is greater than the parts scenario.
And so that's going to bring us to getting into like, what is Star-Crossed Realms? What is it? What is Star-Crossed Realms? What are we trying to accomplish with it? What kind of mechanics and things are going to be present in the game?
But before we do that, before we get started, this week's episode is brought to you by Koenig Creations. Koenig Creations is a print and play design studio that seeks to make accessible, fun games that are easy to print. Check out their website at koenigcreations.com, Koenig, Creations with a K. Koenig Creations just successfully launched their Vault expansion on Kickstarter recently and raised over $700. Check out the rest of their print and play games on their website. One of their games that I really enjoyed playing recently was called Pencil Planner. There was a part of me that always wanted to be a city planner in life. And so with Pencil Planner, you are creating routes around a city, trying to net yourself the most income. So check them out. Koenig Creations, easy to print, easy to play. What are we working on? And I say that question to you, Mark and Peter. Literally, the two of you have been working on playtesting and creating the very beginnings of Star-Crossed Realms. And I don't know the answer to that question at all. I watched you playtest for about 5 minutes. I got to see what it looked like on playingcards.io. I saw you guys go on a very awkward date that ended terribly. In fact, in the second round, Peter just decided I'm paying the bill and I'm leaving.
It was this is not the best date ever.
So the first thing that I want to do is I want to try to paint a picture for the listeners of what currently Star-Crossed Realms looks like when you're playing the game.
Jason, imagine your playmat.
Yes, go on.
And 2 stacks of cards that are going to be used to build your basic deck. Your provokes and your responses. Those are your basic units for your starter deck. Between you and your partner is your buy deck, the deck of cards that you're going to buy things from. What separates this game from other deck builders is most of the time you play with a buy row face up. In this game, the buy row is face down because we're capitalizing on more hidden information to create more of a mood. Then each player will have their individual deck in front of them, a discard pile that they'll establish. And then there are 2 small decks that are used for setting up the game. There's a deck of traits that determine your starting deck, and there's a deck of activities that determine other conditions or rules, or possibly the length of the amount of time that you're going to be playing for the rest of the game. So once the whole game is set up, it will look very much like your typical deck builder, like Dominion or Star Realms, or if you need the really deep cut, the Street Fighter deck builder. But imagine most of that information about what you can buy and what you have access to is face down. Information is hidden until you reveal it.
And we've talked about this. I've asked that question knowing that the answer is kind of challenging. We've talked about that it's been rather difficult to find a way to describe card games. So we've been talking about MMA Gauntlet versus a board game. And when we're talking about something that isn't very familiar with everybody, for example, Monopoly. If I just say Monopoly, everybody pictures it. Everybody sees it. That no other description is needed to understand. If I was creating a game and I was like, oh, it's like Monopoly. Everyone's like, they see a board, you're moving around it, you're collecting money, you might be like losing money. And trying to describe this for us has been quite challenging. So tell me what you both have done. I'll start with Peter first. Peter, what have you done? Because I know you have put by far the most amount of work to get us to where we're at right now. What have you done I know you played around with Tabletop Simulator. You're now working within playingcards.io. You at some point were getting ideas for cards and you were writing them down. Tell us about the work you did to get us where we're at right now.
Yeah, so initially I was just kind of spamming out cards with like just kinds of actions. Like, what are the kinds of actions that people could make on a date? And I was just looking to see what kind of patterns emerge so I could coalesce those into card types. So, imagine there's a lot of different cards that really are just different versions of asking each other questions. There's lots of different cards that would really just be for different versions of telling jokes or flirty comments, or so I probably started out with just like a list of 40, 50, 60 different kinds of actions that people could take. And I don't want to try to make that sound more impressive than it was, because like a lot of them were just like, ask about hobbies, ask about family, ask about career, those sorts of things, just so I could get an idea of what are going to be the core elements in terms of what types of cards we're playing with. And I really just wanted to have a whole bunch of different cards that I could use to build out what would be the core gameplay loop. And the first core gameplay loop I created was probably accidentally more Magic the Gathering than anything, which to me, a Magic the Gathering romance game probably sounds like one of the worst Frankenstein monsters you could possibly make. So initially I was trying to work all these cards that I had made into Tabletop Simulator. And what I was really running into was I was really struggling with getting the scripting to work. And I was spending so much time just going through tutorials and trying different things to try to just get something functional so that we could play with each other on different sides of the country. Hats off to Wayne again for suggesting playingcards.io, because that really was a huge step forward for me in being able to quickly kind of bring this to life and to get something where we could actually play with each other. Obviously, we are going to want to develop proficiency with Tabletop Simulator, because we're not just going to be making card games for the rest of our lives. And so that is something that, we're still tinkering with on the back end, so that, once we wanted to make a conventional board game, we have the skill set in place to do that. But playingcards.io has really been the secret sauce.
I know you said playingcards.io was something that allowed you to do 10 hours of work in Tabletop Simulator in like 2 hours.
Yeah, so like it took me hours and hours and hours to program a button in Tabletop Simulator that just dealt the starting hand, and there was actually an error, so it wasn't even working. And with playingcards.io, I was able to get there to that same point very quickly. And so then, which was nice because then I could start thinking about, okay, what does the game space look like? What does the board look like? What decks of cards do they have? Where do they sit relative to each other? If you're beating your head against the wall with scripting, it's really hard to think about those sorts of things. So it really just slows your design to a crawl. So having access to a tool like Playing Cards.io, even though it doesn't have as many functions, it does give you the ability to get moving quickly.
So you get the cards in. Mark and you have had 2 kind of major playtests. Tell us about the first one. How did the first playtest go? What did you learn from it?
First playtest was terrible. It's not that it was terrible, it's that it really had that 2-player solitaire feeling, especially when you have so much information being hidden from the other player. If like I'm going through my 5 market cards and deciding which ones to buy, and you can't see what I'm doing, there's big pauses between action, and that's not the feeling you want for what's supposed to be a dating game. It does not reinforce the theme of we're constantly interacting with each other and we're constantly trying to play off each other.
And so that drove kind of we stopped there and we did a very short, play of like half of a turn of a game of cribbage, because I think for me, like this aspect of back and forth call and response, provoke and response is really well emulated in a card game style of cribbage. And for anyone who's not familiar, there's a part of the turn in cribbage where you and your opponent go back and forth playing one card at a time and you exchange. So I play my provoke, then Peter plays his response, and then I play a new provoke and Peter plays a response, or Peter plays a provoke and I play a different provoke. That's how we decided to shape the gameplay towards where we are now.
So you took that, you went into the second playtest. What did you do differently? What's the next thing you've learned?
The second playtest was actually pretty fun. So that was a really good feeling to have. And we really redesigned it around us constantly interacting with each other and having players make as few choices at a time as possible. So if initially you're drawing 5 cards, for example, and you're having to decide which of those 5 cards you're going to take, you're having to look at how much of a resource you have to buy cards. That's a lot of decisions to be making at once. And so we pared it down to every time you continue or end a chain. So if I ask a question and then Mark asks the question, he gets to draw a single card from the market, decide whether or not he wants to add it to his deck, and then play a card in response to me. And so that led to only having to make choices about one card at a time, really sped up the gameplay, and it had us interacting with each other constantly.
And remind me, because you said before we even started that playtest, you said, when we play, I want you to be thinking about this, and I'm totally blanking on what it was.
I said the one thing I want you to be thinking about is this core gameplay loop of this provoke, response, and this whole concept of building chains, and is that quick and is it fun? Because initially the core gameplay loop we had in our first playtest was very Magic the Gathering, sense of I go, then you go, or if we were playing Dominion, I play my 15 villages, you go get your coffee. So I was really just be like, okay, what do you think about this very simple, very core gameplay loop as a foundational piece, and how are we going to, do we want to develop that into something further?
And that was, like you said, that was much more streamlined. It was a lot more efficient. It was a lot more fun. The interaction happened more quickly. And even while we were doing that, that's when Jason would say the lights probably like hit my eyes, because then we started talking about like, oh, like this chain ended. Like, what could we do to make this chain longer? Really started opening our eyes to the possibilities of where we can go moving forward with something that felt efficient, interactive, and timely.
So I've been trying to, play the role of the listener this episode. I saw some of the cards for about 5 minutes. When you're saying chain, what is a chain? What are the specific things that are happening? You keep saying provoke. Both of you keep saying provoke. It's question. You're asking a question.
Yes.
Right? And then the other person is responding. So tell me, you play a card. What's on that card?
Yeah, so if we're talking about just our basic starting cards, it's going to say basic provoke or basic response. Then there will be some flavor text like ask about hobbies or tell about family. And then down below, it'll have a brief sentence about what that card does.
So you play that initially. Mark plays
I would play the basic response. At the top of the card, it says basic response. It has it has matching or different flavor text, tell about your family, tell about your pet, and then it has the rules implications for the card.
So that is creating a chain.
Yes.
Peter plays a card that asks you about your hobbies. You play something that responds to the hobbies. Now, if I didn't have something in my hand, which I saw when you both were playing, you then like change the subject. You ask the question. You didn't answer their specific thing. Now it's a new chain. Help me see what a chain is.
Yeah. So a chain is, you start a chain by playing a provoke card, and you can respond to it with either a provoke card or a response card. A provoke card always starts a chain or continues a chain. A response card always ends a chain. So if I play a provoke card that says ask about hobbies, Mark can play a provoke card that says ask about family, and then I could play a response card that says tell about career. And what that's supposed to do is replicate the feeling of us having a conversation that's covering a range of topics.
And so the most fundamental unit then would be one provoke, one response. That chain is concluded. At some point, we're going to run out of cards in our hands, and then we're going to reset and start a new hand.
Explain it to me. If I'm on a date, Mark and I, let's go on a date, Mark. So we're at a coffee shop, and I say to Mark, "Oh, tell me about your family." If Mark does not tell me about his family, but instead says, "Tell me about your hobbies," how is that something that is similar to a date? Because I want a response to my question. I don't want him to ask me another question about something else. Red flag.
The card asks about hobbies. Hey, what do you do for fun on the weekends? And do you play soccer? Do you do this? And Mark could be like, oh yeah, well I play soccer with my family. My uncle is a lifelong soccer fan. And so in that world, you could imagine you played ask about hobbies and Mark played tell about family. So that's just because, conversations aren't perfect one-to-one things. And now you can always play what we would call a matched set, where if you say ask about hobbies and then Mark plays tell about hobbies, that's going to be a match set. That's going to give you a little bonus. But generally, a chain is supposed to represent a conversation. And if it continues, that's us jiving with each other. We're really warming up to each other. Things are going well. So we want to reward that, even though the card is just saying ask about hobbies and ask about career, for example.
And I think, Jason, your question is really good, because that is something that we kind of came to by the end of the second playtest. Is we were like, oh, this loop, this core gameplay of provoke, response, question, answer is really fun and is meeting the flavor, meeting the mechanical need that we identified. But to your question, we were also like, oh yeah, it would be nice, like, if I don't feel like talking about my family or I can't talk about my family, I want to have some other way to continue. When we were done with the second playtest, those are the kinds of questions that we were also starting to come to, of like, well, what are the other conversation pieces or components that are going to go into building a longer chain? Because it is very close to be like, ask about pets, tell about pets. What about ask about pets and then deflect, or ask about pets and make some comment? And so looking at ways in the Biro deck to then create more nuance and more variety in the way that you can respond to the provokes and the responses.
That makes sense to me, having seen the two of you play now, and to understand that it's by design. That what you're both telling me is by design. That is simulating the conversation by, we're imagining in between that there's different answers happening, and one question to another question is good. Let me ask you this, because I know this is an area that both you and Peter you have experience playing role-playing games. When I started watching the two of you play, Peter said, like, one of the first cards they put down was, tell me about your hobbies. And then you responded with a card that actually said it was your hobbies. But I started thinking about, oh, wouldn't this be interesting if you actually said what your hobbies actually really are as you're playing this game? Or if you pretended to be a character, your hobbies are dance fighting. But if you had said, oh, one of my hobbies is cycling, I'm really into cycling, and then you played your next card, and started that role play. So for the two of you who have a role play background, how much of this game is in your mind targeting people that might be interested in doing this as a role play or as people who might just be, playing the cards?
That is something that was really a strong motivation for this game for me. Obviously, I have a long background in tabletop role playing. That's my natural default state.
Your natural gaming habitat.
Yeah, it's my natural gaming habitat. I'm endemic to tabletop RPGs. But role-playing romance is really awkward and really cringy unless you really have a really special combination of people that can make it work without it being really uncomfortable for everyone else at the table. People may not want to play around with those feelings. They may not feel comfortable with them, but people should still get to play with romance as a genre. It's one of the biggest genres out there, and I think this is a good way for people to engage with it without feeling like, again, they're role-playing romance with their best friend. Instead, they had this frame of cards that were playing against each other, and a natural roleplay may come from that. A natural series of characters may emerge from that, or they may not, and either way, it's still hopefully going to be a good time.
Well, one of the things that I have always liked about the dating game is, and I did it with the supermarket game, I really wanted to create a game that people can connect with. Raise your hand if you've ever been to a supermarket. It's a podcast. We can't see anyone's hands, but we all raised our hands. Who's been on a date?
Everyone raised their hands again.
That's right. When I think about other games that I really like Manhattan Project. We almost played it last night.
No, we didn't.
We did almost. Raise your hand if you ever built an atomic bomb. Nobody's raising their hand, right, Peter? We can't see Peter, but I assume
Not raising my hand.
They're not raising their hand. So I've always liked that it's very relatable. And I've never played another dating game. But I will say the one thing that keeps me from being as bright as you are about the game and as excited about the game is, I don't like collaborative games. Except I started playing Gloomhaven, and I have really enjoyed that. But I don't traditionally like cooperative games, which is the opposite of what Peter said when we introduced them at the start of this episode. We're on different ends of the spectrum there. He really enjoys that. I want to beat you. I want to beat you in the dating game still, right? I still want to be able to do that. Where are we at with how we're viewing this game? Is it 100% cooperative? You can't individually win. You can only win together.
Jason, what is it about the collaborative games that you don't like?
There's a couple, they're kind of connected pieces. I know the classic term for the first one is quarterbacking, where you have somebody who has played the game before or has a really good understanding of the game, and it's your turn. You're thinking about what you want to do, and they're just over there telling you what you should do. They're telling you, oh, you need to go and do this, or I would do this. And I don't like that when I'm playing a game. I want the actions and the ideas to be mine. That's really important to me. I don't want somebody else to just look at my cards and say, oh, you should do that. Or do you have that one thing? You should play that one thing. We need somebody to play that one thing right now. That triggers me. And, you always have somebody at the table who has a bigger personality. And when you play a cooperative game like Pandemic, Forbidden Island, there's always somebody they're just like, this is what we should all do. That person can just go play the game by themselves, put out all the characters and just play it. And I think that's the same experience. Why do I need to be there for them to do that? So that's the big thing for me is I just feel like you don't get to really play the game. Other people are playing the game for you at times.
Follow-up question. You like games like Coup.
Yes.
You like social deduction.
Yes.
Now, there is an objective where you're trying to win those games, but there is a collaborative sharing information process based on hidden information. What Dating Game or Star-Crossed Realms has differently, and I'm going to let Peter talk more about it, you get to use some of those social deduction skills, or we could design in a way such that you could use those social deduction skills to meet your dating objective, because there is all of this hidden information. You don't know what's in your partner's hand. You don't know what their character traits are. And those could be elements of the design that we could toggle or modulate in order to get that social deduction feeling while you're still working towards a common objective. So bringing it back to Star-Crossed Realms, Peter, what's the vision for the end game, or how you envision like the questions of, is it collaborative? Is it social deduction? Is it competitive? What's the lead designer's vision?
Yeah, so obviously you can't have quarterbacking if I don't know what you have. Because I can't tell you what to play, again, if I don't know what you have. If I don't know what your traits are, if I don't know what cards you've added to your deck, if I don't know what card you're looking at right now to choose whether to add it to your deck, I can't really tell you what to do. So just like in a real date, I don't know what you have until you tell me, or I don't know what you have until you show me. So what we're trying to do is leverage a feeling of uncertainty and anticipation to have players set each other up for building out their decks. Like I can only add to my deck if you play a provoke card and I'm able to continue a chain or close a chain. So I'm dependent on you in order to build that deck. So I don't get to play those really great combinations until you've set me up for it. So it's obviously not a traditional competitive game because obviously, like you've talked about before, you don't go into a date trying to beat the other person. If we were to make that, the mechanics would not feel right for the theme of the game, and it would just be a jarring feeling. There wouldn't be a point of making a dating game, I don't think, if the point is to beat the other person, unless it's a Bachelor style game where we're all playing different contestants trying to win the Bachelor.
Watch out for the multiplayer expansion coming to Kickstarter summer of 2070. And
in terms of like win conditions, kind of what I'm imagining right now, and this obviously could change, is, and this could play into your desire for social deduction or for solving a puzzle or solving a mystery, of using different cards to figure out what your partner's traits are, and then your trait cards would have the win conditions built into them. So like if in order to quote unquote win the date, if I need to meet 3 conditions on trait cards, but I need to first do something to reveal those trait cards, and that could be the thing that we're aiming towards, the things that we're building towards. So I'm playing against you in the sense that you're a mystery that I do have to solve, but I'm not playing against you in the sense that you're a Gloomhaven monster I have to murder.
So that makes our what's next pretty clear. The next thing that the 3 of us are going to do is dive in deeper. And Peter, having put in the most amount of time into this project, where can Mark and I come in right now, move the game closer to where we want it?
So there's one final piece I want to finish before we kind of spit it back out to make sure that the cards from the market deck are using the same mechanics from the cards from the new version that Mark and I like the gameplay style of. And so I'm paring it down to a much more limited version of the market deck, so it's not going to have a full 35 cards. It just has something that we can work with to see how these things are going to be interacting. So once that's done, I think I'm going to get over to you guys more openly, and then I also just want you guys to think about like, what are the different kinds of like interactions people have on dates? What are the different kinds of questions people ask each other? What are the different kinds of ways people respond to those questions? Just so we can have more categories for the kinds of actions that people can be taking.
And then as a group, we'll kind of shape like, what is the end game going to look like, and how are we going to bring in enthusiasm, attraction, so that we can create an end game. Or end of games, an end state for the game.
Because the next goal would be to start getting it to more people.
Peter, I'm stoked. Jason, I'm stoked. Jason's not stoked yet.
I mean, you addressed Peter first, but
by seniority. Friendship seniority, not company seniority.
Well, lead designer it's a big deal.
Right?
Thank you so much for being on the show and joining us today, Peter.
Of course, it's been fun.
The Misplay podcast is brought to you by Mike C., Missy, JP Savard, Parney, Kyle Flowers, Adjos, Brian, Bins. Consider donating at patreon.com/themisplay. If you'd like to become a featured sponsor of the show, find our FAQ in Discord. And it's just a match made in heaven and you take me out to dinner and do the edit for me.
Oh, we'll see. Text me later.
It's bad news for me. Why aren't you looking me in the eyes?
Tell me about your family.
Ooh, have you met my dog?
I love to play baseball.
Now you're really immersed in the gameplay loop.
Yeah, I'm playing the game.